Known today as one of the most evocative abandoned places on Earth, Nicosia Airport on the island of Cyprus was once the gateway to a paradise frequented by the richest travelers and star-studded tourists who sought to escape the troubles of a wild and whirling world, only for this facility to be closed suddenly following the invasion of the island by Turkish forces during 1974, leaving the airport frozen as a time capsule of what was once considered holiday-making during the mid-20th century. Nicosia Airport began life during the 1920s as an emergency landing strip laid out on the scrub-covered Mesoria Plain, approximately 6 miles west of the Cypriot capital of Nicosia, the facility being built by the Royal Air Force of the British Empire, who had controlled the island as a crown colony since the nation was leased to them at the end of the Russo-Turkish War in 1878, with Cyprus holding a key strategic position in allowing for stopovers on routes both military and civilian between the British homeland and the Middle Eastern colonies of the Empire, including the Mandate of Palestine, Aden and Singapore, soon becoming the main RAF station for the Mediterranean and used to keep a close eye on the activities of potential enemies such as Turkey and the states of the Southern Soviet Union. In 1939, with the outbreak of World War II in Europe, the first paved runway was constructed at the field in partnership with the Shell Company and Pierides and Michaelides Limited, the airbase, known as RAF Nicosia, being of vital importance in helping to fight back Rommel's notorious Afrika Korps during the North African Campaign, as well as providing vital assistance when the conflict spread across the Balkans and into Greece and Crete during April 1941, expansive facilities being constructed to maintain both American and British bombers on long-range missions against Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy on the Eastern Front in Greece, Crete and Romania, while at the same time being of such distance from the front line that it was beyond the range of equivalent German fighters and bombers. With the end of the war in 1945, Nicosia continued to expand as air transport took over from shipping as the fastest way of serving the empire, and throughout the late 1940s, operated almost exclusively in the role of an RAF station, the first formal squadron to be based at RAF Nicosia being No. 6 Squadron, which had been relocated to the field on October 3, 1946, in order to protect British interests in the Eastern Mediterranean from Turkey and the increasingly hostile forces of Egypt, and comprised fighter aircraft that initially took the form of Supermarine Spitfire LF-9s before re-equipping with Hawker Tempest F-6s, de Havilland Vampire jets, and finally de Havilland Venom FB-1s, although civilian traffic being routed to the colonies via Cyprus was allowed to land there, with the first official civilian service to routinely operate to the field being Misrair of Egypt using de Havilland DH-86 express propeller airliners. By 1948, though, it became rapidly apparent that, in the post-war era, air travel was allowing, for the first time, major tourism to be experienced across the Mediterranean region, with Cyprus, as both a sun-kissed paradise and a crown colony of the British Empire, being seen as a prime holiday destination for UK tourists, the facilities at Nicosia being woefully under-equipped to handle this new influx of passenger traffic, as by the end of 1948 they comprised 3 Nissen huts, used as a terminal building housing customs, immigration, civil aviation, signals, traffic and operational services, while food and drink facilities for civilian users of the field could be found at the Navy, Army and Air Force Institutes or NAFI cafeteria located at the adjacent RAF base, the main customers at the airport at the beginning of 1949 being Misrair, together with Middle East Airlines of Lebanon and the home-based Cyprus Airways, as well as British international carrier BOAC, which used Nicosia as a stopover on its routes to the Middle and Far East. Therefore, in order to make Nicosia Airport more suitable for passenger traffic, a brand new terminal building adjacent to the pre-existing RAF base was opened in May 1949 at a cost of £50,000, or £1.8 million in 2023, and was designed by the Cypriot Public Works Department, the construction of the new terminal being the moment when Cyprus turned from a quiet Mediterranean hideaway off the south coast of Turkey to a major holiday destination for people travelling from across Europe, the early days of civil aviation being primarily the domain of more affluent tourists, ranging from heads of business and industry to the emerging new money stars of stage and screen. Nicosia Airport, throughout the 1960s, being the gateway to the paradise retreats of Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton, Raquel Welch and Brigitte Bardot, its attractiveness being further added to by the fact that from London it was only 4 hours flying time away, as opposed to the 8 to 10 hour journeys of services to the Caribbean. Sadly, the 1950s also proved to foreshadow the violent future that would soon be faced by both the airport and the Cypriot people, as in a bid to gain independence from the British Empire and to unify Cyprus with Greece, fighters for the Ethniki Organosis Kyprion Agoniston, or EOKA, led a brutal campaign against the colonial power through bombings and shootings under what was known as the Cyprus Emergency of 1955 to 1959, Nicosia Airport itself being not immune to the carnage, as on March 3, 1956, Skyways Limited Handley Page Hermes 4, Golf Alpha Lima Delta Whiskey, was blown up at the terminal by a time bomb prior to a flight back to London. Deaths and injuries only avoided by the fact that the flight was operating 20 minutes late, with the crew and 68 passengers, comprised largely of women and children, having not yet boarded, while just under 2 months later on April 27th, an RAF Douglas Dakota was also bombed by the Aoka while on the ground, but again with no deaths or injuries. Regardless of the crisis, tourist traffic into Cyprus continued to grow, so much so that it began to leave the RAF without sufficient capacity to conduct their own operations alongside civilian air traffic, thus resulting in the creation of RAF Akrotiri on the south coast of the island near Limassol during 1955, allowing for the transfer of fighter operations to the new base, while transport aircraft remained at RAF Nicosia, the fighter squadrons based at Akrotiri playing a major role during the Suez Crisis of 1956, wherein Gloucester Meteor night fighters, English Electric Canberra photo reconnaissance aircraft, and de Havilland Venom ground attack fighters led an aerial campaign against the forces of the Egyptian nationalist government led by Gamal Abdel Nasser, after he had brought the vital Suez Canal under the control of the Egyptian state through the forced nationalization of the British and French Suez Canal Company, which owned and operated the canal. Eventually, amid continued pressure by the United Nations and as a result of the ongoing Cyprus emergency, on February 19, 1959, Britain stated that Cyprus would be granted independence from August 1960 to form the Republic of Cyprus, creating a new government under the presidency of charismatic religious and political leader Archbishop Makarios III, although despite relinquishing control of the island by the British government, the Royal Air Force continued to maintain a presence at both RAF Nicosia and RAF Akrotiri under what was known as the Near East Command, a division of what was formerly the Middle Eastern Command, and was responsible for RAF activities west of the Suez Canal, while activities east of the Suez Canal would be controlled from RAF Komaksar in the colony of Aden, the control tower of Nicosia Airport being staffed exclusively by British RAF military controllers, while local Cypriot air traffic controllers were trained under scholarship from November 1960, leading to the replacement of British personnel in the tower by Cypriot staff between 1963 and 1964, Nicosia also being home, from February 1961, to the Nicosia Area Control Centre, as designated by the International Civil Aviation Organization or ICAO, which was given the responsibility to provide air traffic control services for an area covering 175,000 square kilometers in diameter, encompassing nearly the entire eastern Mediterranean region. At the time of independence in 1960, Nicosia was the only commercial airport operational on the island of Cyprus, and was served by 7 international airlines performing scheduled flights that amounted to 147,000 passengers and 6,615 air transport movements per annum, added to further by the emergence of charter flights and package holidays towards the middle of the decade, this huge influx of traffic only serving to demonstrate how antique and ill-equipped the facility was when it came to handling such large numbers of passengers, with the 1949 terminal building being completely outstripped by this new demand, an agreement being eventually reached to merge RAF operations at Akrotiri, and thus meant as much space could be made available as possible for civilian traffic, with the last use of RAF Nicosia being during 1966, although this, in combination with expansions to the apron, did little to alleviate the issue. Ultimately, on March 27, 1968, a brand new terminal building, designed by West German company Dorsch und German and constructed by local contractor Sibaco, was opened at a cost of £1.1 million, of which £500,000 was contributed by the British government, with the old terminal building being taken out of use and repurposed as the headquarters of the Nicosia Flying Club, the opening of the new terminal being perfectly timed, as for the 1968 year, the facility saw 283,000 passengers from 61,783 flights pass through its doors, this upgraded facility being able to accommodate 800 passengers at a single time, while expansions to the parking area meant 11 aircraft could be serviced simultaneously. These factors combined meaning that, by 1973, passenger traffic had jumped to 785,564 during that year, and the Area Control Centre served 81,563 flights, long-term aspirations being for the airport to be expanded further by way of additional ramp space that could allow for 16 aircraft to be parked at the same time, as well as making room for brand new wide-body jet airliners such as the Boeing 747, Douglas DC-10, and Lockheed L-1011 TriStar, which were starting to emerge on heavily trafficked holiday routes to the Mediterranean during the early 1970s. 1973, however, proved to be the last full year of operation for Nicosia Airport, as throughout the first quarter of 1974, intercommunal violence between the primarily Greek population of the island and small enclaves of Turkish Cypriots led to Archbishop Makarios being deposed on July 15th in a coup orchestrated by the Cypriot National Guard in conjunction with AOKA B, as ordered by the military junta in Greece, Makarios being removed from office due to his opposition to the military government in Athens, who were planning to make Cyprus a vassal state of the wider Greek nation, as had been intended under the brutal campaign of AOKA during the Cyprus emergency of the 1950s, with Nicosia Airport being closed on the morning of the coup when National Guardsmen took over the control tower, halting all air traffic so as to allow the Greek armed forces to ferry troops onto the island using transport aircraft from July 17th, civilian air traffic being allowed to resume on July 18th, by which time the terminal had been overrun by terrified holidaymakers attempting to flee on whatever aircraft was sent to evacuate them. This move by the Greek forces incurred the response of nearby Turkey, as the creation of a Greek colony just off the nation's southern coast, together with potential ethnic cleansing against the Turkish Cypriot population, meant that 2 days later a sweeping invasion was undertaken by Turkish armed forces from the north, including the establishment of a beachhead on the northern shore of the island through amphibious landings, while Turkish attack and transport helicopters conducted a daring aerial raid against Nicosia Airport directly, so as to halt the landing of Greek troops by Hellenic transport aircraft, while in order to stop the potential landing of Turkish troops at the airfield, the Greek and Cypriot forces positioned one of the 3 Cyprus Airways Hawker Siddeley Trident commercial airliners based at Nicosia on the runway in order to provide a block, this aircraft being subsequently destroyed during the air raid, the airport ultimately being the site of the most brutal fighting between the Turkish invaders and Cypriot National Guard special forces positioned in the terminal building, the control tower, and in the vicinity of the 2 other Cyprus Airways Tridents located at a remote stand that were being used as cover, resulting in these aircraft being heavily damaged by small arms fire alongside the terminal building and other infrastructure. In the end, the Turkish forces were able to capture 3% of the island before a ceasefire, as instigated by the United Nations, was declared on August 15th, although by this point 3,500 Turkish and 6,000 Cypriot and Greek troops had been killed, while as a compromise under the terms of the peace agreement, the island of Cyprus would essentially be split in two between the autonomous Turkish Cypriot administration, renamed in 1983 to the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus or TRNC, and the Republic of Cyprus in the south, with the 2 halves of the island defined through the UN-monitored Green Line that continues to divide Cyprus to this day. The Green Line, which stretches for 112 miles and varies in width from between 20 meters to 4 miles, encompassing many former settlements that have now been left abandoned since the peace agreement was signed in 1974, including the once luxurious resort of Varosha, a favorite destination for Hollywood stars such as Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, and the Nicosia Airport itself, the separation of the nation also leading to a transfer of ethnic communities, as 150,000 Greek Cypriots were expelled from the northern Turkish Republic, while 60,000 Turkish Cypriots were displaced from the south, together with thousands of others forced to leave their homes within the Green Line itself, as their properties were suddenly rendered off-limits. Amid the outcomes of the UN-brokered ceasefire, the heavily damaged Nicosia Airport remained silent as negotiations dragged on as to what the future of the field would be, potential options being for the facility to be jointly run by the Turkish and Greek authorities, although this outcome was rejected by Archbishop Makarios, who refused to concede any joint operation of the facility with what he perceived to be an unlawful Turkish occupation of the island, with negotiations, as undertaken in Vienna, continuing until May 3, 1975, when it was agreed, in principle, that the airport would be operated jointly by the 2 governments of the island nation, though ultimately this never came to pass in practice, the airport remaining dormant and rotting, and thereby leaving the island cut off from the air, with the exception of RAF military flights into Akrotiri in the south, thus prompting the 2 governments to develop independent airports in the north and south of the island to replace Nicosia, the first to open being Larnaca International Airport on the south coast on February 8, 1975, which recommissioned a long-closed pre-existing RAF airfield which had once occupied the same site, the Southern Republic later being joined by a second airport in the far southwest of the island at Paphos, which opened in 1982, while in the north, the former RAF base at Erkan was repurposed for use by the Turkish Republic as the main aerial gateway to the north of the island, although this airport can only be served by flights from destinations within mainland Turkey, as it is not considered a legal entry point into the island of Cyprus. However, while Nicosia Airport was closed and sealed off by UN peacekeeping forces, thus ensuring it would never see operational use again, the final commercial flight from the field did in fact take place 3 years after its closure, when, in 1977, under an agreement between British Airways and the UN, The London Heathrow-based mechanical crew would be allowed the opportunity to travel to the abandoned airfield in order to review and salvage the two Hawker Siddeley Trident airliners which had been left stranded on the remote stand at the airport. These two aircraft having been leased to Cyprus Airways by British Airways' predecessor, British European Airways, and were therefore the property of the UK flag carrier. The two surviving units, 5 Bravo Delta Alpha Bravo and 5 Bravo Delta Alpha Charlie, being thoroughly inspected by the mechanical team, coming to the conclusion that 5 Bravo Delta Alpha Bravo was too heavily damaged to be possibly made airworthy again, although by stripping it of useful parts, 5 Bravo Delta Alpha Charlie could be patched up temporarily in order to allow for a low-altitude transfer back to London for a full overhaul and return to service. 5 Bravo Delta Alpha Charlie eventually leaving Nicosia as the last ever flight from the airport in May of that year, where it was re-registered Golf Alpha Victor Foxtrot Bravo and would remain in service with British Airways across Europe until 1982, when it was flown to the Imperial War Museum at Duxford for preservation, while 5 Bravo Delta Alpha Bravo, after 49 years, remains derelict and bleached under the baking Cypriot sun, now surrounded by barbed wire in order to deter parts theft and other looting. Today, Nicosia Airport remains a time capsule of how it was left when the Turkish forces invaded in 1974, with contemporary adverts still on display within the terminal, while the building's interior is now caked in thick dust, sand, and bird droppings, all pieces of the infrastructure remaining in the position they were after the last frantic commercial flights were made, as all-out war on the island nation became a growing fear among panicked tourists. The ruined airport, together with the heavily stripped remains of Trident 5 Bravo Delta Alpha Bravo, being hugely popular among urban explorers, who either sneak into the UN buffer zone or are officially escorted, so as to get a glimpse of this incredible sight, a once fully functional airport, among the busiest in Europe, now frozen completely in time.